Okay, I believe we're recording now. Perfect. So, I had a slide up here. I was going to show it. We're just going to be doing this today. We're finishing up adding our Firebase to our app, and we'll talk about security rules. We'll hop into the code now. Everyone should be roughly where we're at. To begin, we're going to be working a lot in Messages box, right? And every time that you every time you make a change, it will automatically refresh this page for you because we've got hot reloading enabled. And so because of that, every time you refresh the page, it's going to ask, what's your name? And that's going to get really annoying really quick. So let's start by opening up MainPageJS. And a way to get around that, because remember, it's rendering this login based on if name is in state. And so naturally a way to get around that is to hard code some kind of state in here so that there's automatically, when it loads, something in state. So at the very top, on line around 15, you should have this.state. Just give it your name. Go ahead and save it with that in there. And when you do, you'll notice a refresh on this page, and it will automatically log you in. You won't have to type in your name, anything like that. That's just for right now so we can work on this and not have to keep typing our name. It'll get annoying real quick. That make sense? That is MainPage.js on line 15. And again, for anyone that's using either Sublime or Atom, a real quick way to jump around is Command-T. That opens up your fuzzy finder, and you can type in whatever name you have, as long as you've got your project loaded into your editor. So MainPage.js, we'll open that page. Messages box, we'll open that page. Just a quick little command there. Cool. Awesome. So let's hop into message box. We left off on this ComponentDidMount lifecycle function, and we wrote in this.ref.on value and passed in a snapshot. Okay. So as I said in last class, ComponentDidMount is a React development lifecycle event that gets hit. It's one of three main ones. I just said two. Three main ones in React components. All right, you'll see ComponentDidMount. There's also component will mount, meaning that it has not been rendered, and component will unmount, meaning clean up anything you're doing because this component is about to be removed from the page. And that's where we're going to be removing our listener later on. So ComponentDidMount is generally the place in React where you're going to create any listeners, any database connections, anything like that. And before we go further, I want to talk about this.ref.on versus this.ref.once. Now, to remind you, we created our database ref on line 16. We have this.ref is equal to firebase.database.ref.child. So if you look at your Firebase console, and as long as you haven't added any data to it, it should look something very similar to this, where you have your root node and then a child node called message. Is everyone following? I'm really going to just keep going until like someone stops and asks a question, and I love questions. Feel free to just ask away if I start getting confusing. Yeah. Yes, yeah, and that's fine. We'll address that. We'll get into that. So this is what your Firebase should look like. And the reason why we can connect to Firebase is because in our index.js last time, we did this config, right? This config in here, along with initialize app, every time the page loads, it creates that authenticated connection to Firebase using our API key, and we have access to our Firebase. So that means that anywhere in any other file that we have in our project, we can say firebase.database.ref, which gives us access to this root node, and we're concerned with the child node message, right? So that's our ref. Now this ref doesn't do anything. We created a reference, but we haven't turned that reference on. We haven't used that reference for anything. But in ComponentDidMount, that's what we do. We're going to turn that reference on. We're going to utilize that reference to actually access some data. So on line 21, write this.ref.once. All right, change it from on to once. I'm going to talk real quick about the concept of on versus once. So once has a connotation of meaning you're going to get some data back one time. You can think of it like a normal SQL query. All right, it just returns data once, you query for it, you get it back, and that's it. So we have a this.updateMessages. In this .once, we're choosing what type of data instance we want. There are a couple of different types. I'm not going to go into all of them. You can look at the Firebase documents, but there's value, there's child added, there's child removed, but value is the most common one that you're going to use. And that just means give me everything, all the data from this place at that time, as it currently is. And then what we're doing here is we're passing into this method, here's this opening parenthesis, and here's the closing parenthesis. We're passing in a callback function. Once you call this, what do you want to do with the data? And so in these parentheses right here, snapshot is what Firebase is giving us. So you're going to have snapshot here, and we're going to call another method here. Now you guys might ask, wait, John, couldn't you just write all your logic right in there? And the answer is yes. However, you're going to see why you should not do that later. And I had to learn, it took me probably like 15 hours on my capstone to learn why you should not do that. It was the worst 15 hours of coding in my life. And I'd like to pass that along to you guys so you don't run into that same issue.
So the word snapshot there is arbitrary. We could choose that.
That's right. However, in most Firebase documentation, you'll see snapshot as what they use. And so it's just kind of what you're expected to say. It's a snapshot of your data at that time. So we're going to have this.updateMessages, and if you haven't done this already, you'll need to write a new method on your component class called updateMessages, which is right here, this guy right here. Zoom in a little bit? Yes, I can. Is that good? So make sure you have updateMessages here, and we're just going to console.log snapshot. Now, you're probably getting an error because you might not have passed snapshot in, meaning like in updateMessages, make sure that in the method's signature you have snapshot. Also, you'll need to make sure that it's being passed in your callback function here and passed in right here. Cool. So if you save that and update the page here, what you should see in your console on the right is this. I don't know, I don't think I can. Oh, nice, I totally can. You should see this guy. The snapshot object that Firebase gives you, if you just look at it by itself, is kind of useless. There are two main things that you get off snapshot. You can get the key, which is the key for the node that you're querying, which will be important later on. Or you can call this val method. And val is what's going to actually return the stuff that we want. All right. So in console.log, change snapshot to snapshot.val, and that's a method call. That's not an attribute. Cool. So you save that file, and you'll notice on page reload over here, you now have an object, and this is data we can work with. Here you have the two messages with their keys from Firebase. You guys just got data back from your Firebase. That's huge. You guys just connected to your Firebase. You got data back from it. You can interact with that data. So Firebase's main point on their database, though, and their main marketing point is real-time database. So if you have your Firebase console open, or if you're connected to mine because you're on the class 1 branch, and you pop into here and you change a message from hello world to hello brave, or hello brave world to whatever, you change something in here and you hit enter, you'll notice on the side here nothing changed. All right, I didn't console log anything, I didn't get any updates or anything like that. That's because we're using the .once. .once is a single query. You did it once. If you want to do it again, reload the page or call it again. And we don't want that. For our chat application, we don't want to have to make the person refresh the page every single time they want to see updated messages. That's not very good UX. So we're going to change .once to .on. Let's go ahead and save that. So refresh the page here. And you could open this up, you could look into here. I'm going to keep it closed just because I don't have very much space on the side here. But now let's go back to our console, change it to something here, And boom, you notice on the right, we got a new object back as soon as we change something in our database. And that's because it's that constant connection. It's a channel that's open to Firebase. Anything changed, we'll get a brand new snapshot of what the data looks like after the change. So this is something we can work with. So now that we're getting data back, let's go ahead and move forward to rendering. Rendering this data on our page. And this is going to be more React-based, not Firebase stuff. So before we move on, are there any questions? Is anyone not getting their data correctly? Cool. Again, please stop me if you need to. So let's talk real quick about why we created this this.update messages instead of just writing this logic right in here, which is something that's very common. Most people will just write logic directly in here. A respectful programmer will make sure to clean up the mess that they create.
Well, that's kind of strong.
Yeah. It is strong. It's also a good principle to live by. And so, as I mentioned before, there is another lifecycle method called ComponentWillUnmount in React. Yet again, we're stepping away from Firebase here just for a bit, just to talk about React. ComponentWillUnmount is a lifecycle method that gets called for every component that is in the process of being removed from the page. When React deems that it no longer is necessary, it will remove it from the page. It's a great place to remove any listeners, close any database connections, do anything that is causing your application to eat your client's memory. And so to do that, the reason why we stored our ref on the actual message box class so that we can access it here, and we're going to say this.ref.off. This.ref.off turns off any database listeners that you guys have. And it's awesome, except for one main thing, which we're not actually going to see in this application, but if you start to work on any applications, iOS, Android, web, that require two listeners to the same node at the same time for two different functions, anytime you call this.ref.off, it turns off any listener to that node, be it 1 or 100. And so in Lesson Link, the project that I'm working on right now, we needed to listen to messages. We have an in-app messenger. We need to listen to messages on one component, but on another component as well for two different reasons. And because of that, when I turned my reference off in this component when it unmounted, it turned this one off as well. And I banged my head against the wall for a solid, like I said, 15 hours figuring out how to fix this because the documentation was a little odd. So the way that you get around that is you be more specific. So instead of creating an anonymous function up here, we're going to delete this. And that's what you're going to end up with. A single line, line 21, this.ref.on. We want data based on value, and our callback function is this.updateMessages. Now, you'll notice we don't have any parenthesis in there to say pass the snapshot. That's because Firebase does that automatically to whatever callback function you give. So you will have your snapshot in this.updateMessages, even if you change it this way. Now in the off, you just need to pass in the exact same signature that you did up top. And that will target that specific listener and turn that listener off, not all listeners to that node. And that's just good programming practice just to make sure you don't run into any issues later on. So at this point, you should now have component will unmount with one line, and your component did mount should be refactored to one line. Yeah?
If you have like 3 database connections or 3 nodes that you want to be listening on, can you add multiple into that component?
Absolutely. Yep, you could add a bunch. So say, for example, you have a users ref. This.users ref is equal to here, and then you could just do the exact same thing here, but it would be users ref. No problem. And you'd, ideally you'd have a different function to deal with it. Yep. Yeah.
So does Firebase use sockets?
It's all WebSockets. Yep. It's all WebSocket based. And it's kind of cool. I had to do this yesterday, figuring out some stuff. But you can hop in to your network tab and click on WS, and that will filter by WebSocket connections, and you can actually go in here and see frame by frame anything that's coming from Firebase or going to Firebase at that time if you need to inspect anything, which is nice. So I encouraged all of you to go and download the React developer tools. So if you don't already have that, make sure you get those. We're going to be looking at state and things like that. Okay, so we all good up to this point? So let's start rendering. Cool. So in update messages, we're going to want to do more than just simply like write console this or log it to the console. So this snippet of code that I sent you guys earlier, this guy right here, go ahead and snag that. You'll also notice that that's in your render function. I updated it slightly to be a little easier and so I wouldn't have to explain as much. So in your render function, line 33 through 41, just delete that. You don't need that in there. And instead, copy from Slack what I sent you and paste it in your update messages function. That's right. You should have two lets here. And frankly, I'm going to make that a const. Doesn't really matter though. Okay, we all good? Yes, messagebox.js, update messages. Not under render. If you in your render function, you should see something that looks very similar to that code that I sent you. Delete all of that from your render function. This is a product of me thinking about it yesterday and figuring this is a better way to do it. And so you can remove it from the render function and do it on here. And actually, before I forget, that's right. But you'll delete it. Don't cut it from render function. Delete it altogether, and then copy what's in Slack because it's slightly different. I'm gonna make sure I'm on a different branch here. There we go. Okay, so did you make sure, let me make sure that I'm not getting that. Yeah, no, I'm getting it. Make sure in this.ref.on, you just pass this.update messages, and then in here, you have snapshot up top. Yes, that's right, yeah, so make sure it's in update messages. You should not have anything in render besides return and our HTML in there. So nothing in render besides return and our HTML, or technically it's JSX. That is technically what that is. Okay? We all following up to this point? So the reason why I'm doing this is because in React and JavaScript in general, it's much easier to iterate over an array than it is an object. ES7 will provide generator functions, which is awesome, and I'm currently using that in another project that I'm using, and that makes it much easier to iterate over objects, but it's not as easy as Python. Python, you can iterate over objects all day or whatever. In JavaScript, it's a little different. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take that object that we got from Firebase. If you look in your console again, you're logging it. This is an object with two nested objects inside of it. And we want to turn that object into an array. And this is just a quick little recipe for transferring an object to an array. That's what I had sent you guys, what you now have in update messages. So the way we're doing that is we're creating a new array. And then we are creating a copy of snapshot.val, which is the object that we want from Firebase. And we're going to iterate over the keys in that object. So now, ideally, the keys are test message 1 and test message 2. Right? We all follow? And what we want to do is push those objects, those nested objects, test message 1 and test message 2, into an array. So it will be an array of objects. Now, quick little thing up top here. Currently in this .state, you have an empty object called messages. And this is because, yet again, and this is the way that I've done things before, but I was thinking this would be a better way to do it. We're going to delete that empty object and change it instead for an empty array, just to prepare it to receive an array later. It won't matter, but it's just a better way to do it for documentation purposes.
So it seems like you have two different message object or gap structures in here. What's kind of what we're referencing is this messages is that one. So it seems what's
Yeah, great question.
one versus the other.
Great question, because I know that I generally tend to name things very similarly. So this .state.messages is going to be our ultimate source of truth for what is rendered to the browser. On page load, that's nothing, right? We haven't connected to Firebase. We haven't pulled any messages. That's nothing. So it starts as blank. When we receive information from Firebase, we're going to have an empty array which will eventually be populated with the messages that we want, and that will then be set to our state. So our state will eventually have this here. Messages object is the object that we want to translate to an array. And that's simply because rendering in React, you need an array rather than an object if you want to iterate over multiple things inside of it. And you'll see that in just a little bit when we start to actually get into the rendering. Good question, though. Does that answer your question, Tyler?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to iterate over this. This if statement in here can be a little confusing. This is just because JavaScript is a dirty language. It's dirty, dirty, dirty. Look in this object right here, guys. JavaScript is a prototyping language, meaning that, you know, in Python, if you create a class, or in Java or in C#, you create a class. You have class level. You can have class level variables, and you can have instance level variables, right? So your class level variables in JavaScript are your prototype variables. Every object you create in JavaScript, unless you override the prototype, which you shouldn't do, has a bunch of other functions and a bunch of other variables or attributes on it that you did not put on there. And we don't want to create messages. We don't want those to come up in here because we don't care about those. So this little function in here, messagesObject.hasOwnProperty, is just checking, hey, is this key that we're looping over right now an instance level attribute, or is it a prototype level attribute? If it's an instance type attribute, cool, let's move on. Drop into that if statement. If it's not, we don't care about it. Continue the loop. Makes sense? I know that one's a little weird. That's just pure JavaScript being nonsense. Okay? So that comment on line 34, I just got rid of it. We're going to prepare our messages. The assumption at this point is that we now have a messages object. If we console.log here, messages object key, and save it, we should see our original object with all of our messages, and then each individual object logged out here. That's what that code looks like for there. Make sense? So we now have access to it. What are we going to do to it? Well, we want to render it eventually, so let's store it in that array that we will eventually store in state. Okay? So to do that, we'll take messages object key and push it into this messages array. So again, we're populating a local array that we will eventually set to our state. And that's kind of the best way to interact with your state is if you're about to push a bunch of stuff onto your state, get it all collected first and then push it. Don't push it one by one. Okay?
Is this not pushing it all one by one now?
It is into a local array, and then underneath messages, we're going to say this.setState, and then in here, actually copy that local array to our state. Yes, because this is a loop, we're pushing through each message as we loop through it. So we're looping through the object. First time we go through it, we're going to see test message, and we're going to push that onto the array. Next one, we're going to push that onto the array, and yet again, that is local. This is a local array that we have right here. It's like var. So let is like var. It's just a better, it's ES6. It's like a constant instead. Yes. Oh, is that what you were saying? Message? Oh, okay. Sorry. Yes, you're right. Messages.push. When you said singular, I thought you were talking about each single message. Sorry. You were totally right. Yes, messages.push.
I got a little confused with this.
Yeah. I saw you getting more confused, and I was like, I don't know how else to explain it, but it's because I was wrong. Sorry. Okay. Any other questions? Or any other things that I've done wrong? Okay, so we've now pushed that on there. This is just a little sort function that I decided to write because ideally we want new messages to be on bottom. And that's based on sent time. Because as you're typing, you don't want to have to scroll all the way to the top and see new messages coming to the top. You want it on the bottom, and older messages will continue up the list. Right? So that's a little sort. And then I've already gone ahead and done this, but we're going to set the state on the component level to this messages array. Yeah.
Does that really confuse you with having the same message?
It doesn't, because in ES6, what you just saw there, messages, this is valid. If you have an attribute on an object that is named the exact same name as something you're pushing onto it, you can just write that. And that will infer that you have something, an object or some variable of the same name as an attribute, and it will inject that attribute : variable. And so personally, that's why I choose to do it this way, is because it's cleaner and it's less code that I have to write. So it can be confusing if you didn't know that to begin with, and do this your own coding style. If you prefer to do that differently, that's totally fine. But I just personally I think that looks much better, in my opinion. Cool. So at this point, you should be able to save this, and this is why you need the React Dev tools. You should be able to search for message box rather, to get your component. Click on it, and your state should be an array of length 2 with each of your messages nested in that array. That's where you should be. Jordan's got it. Yeah, so the way that you do that, it's just a fast way to get to your component. So you click on React, or go to React over here if you need to, or anything like that. And if you click on this search box down here, it says search by component name. Your component name that we're working with right now is MessageBox. And that should filter this down here to just the MessageBox component. And you click on that guy, and you'll see its properties and its state. Has anyone found it, but their state is not there?
Found a message box.
On the right-hand side, you should see state once you click on it. Perfect.
So did I move the React extension?
You'll need to create a new tab, like either refresh your, quit your browser and open it up again, or just create a new tab. What was that?
How do you go on the console tab?
Escape. Sorry. So you can use the escape key on there to open and close your console below anything you're looking at. Okay, we doing good? Cool. So we now have messages in our state. So the idea then is in our render function, we're going to actually render out the messages not according to some hard-coded value here, but according to our state. And the way you do that is through the map function. Map is a prototype function. It is a function that is on any array that you build. It's just automatically given to you. So the way you're going to do that is under the unordered list. This is, for those that remember the junior core, this is just like templating in Mako. All right, when in Mako you could do something like for this in something, and then end for, and in here you can loop through and generate templates based on this Python variable. What we're going to do is the similar thing in React. All right, so the way you do that, anytime you are rendering anything in React, if you need to access any kind of JavaScript or run any JavaScript, you do it inside of curly braces. So you open up some curly braces here under the UL, and you say this.state.messages, which refers to our messages array that is now stored in our state, .map. The .map is a function that you can use to generate another array based on attributes or return back certain things in an array. We're going to use it, and it's used extensively in React for templating. So if you go and look up the documentation for the JavaScript .map function, you'll see some other stuff than what we're using it for here. But in React, it's generally used for templating and iterating over attributes to template. So .map takes one parameter, and that is a callback function. So we're going to give it an anonymous function. And instead of giving it curly braces here, like a normal arrow function, give it instead a second set of parentheses. So you have parentheses, arrow, parentheses, and then close parentheses. The reason why you do that is in ES6, again, more ES6 stuff. Yeah?
Is this ES6 or JSX?
ES6. What I'm about to tell you right now is ES6.
Okay.
Technically, all of this right here is all JSX. And that's JSX refers to HTML in your JavaScript. And you'll hear a lot of people talk about that in React. What I'm about to tell you right here is ES6. This is an arrow function. And in arrow functions, you can have an implicit return. So instead of having curly braces, and then inside of these curly braces having to say return this element, you can instead just have this and write your JSX inside of here, and it is implicitly returned for every message that you iterate through. So that means that the parameters entering this arrow function are a single message and its index. It's like an enumerating. We are enumerating over this, this array, so we get the index of what we're going to be iterating over, and we get the actual message object itself. Does that make sense? Did I lose anyone on that? Because that could be a little confusing.
If you have an object with an object, can you then do the same thing with the message not map?
You can't, because so if you have an object, .map is on an array. It's a prototyped function from array, and so object.map doesn't exist, which is why we actually had to translate from an object to an array in the first place, is to be able to do this. Cool. So let's grab this. So for every single message in this.state.messages, we want to return a list item, right? So let's grab this list item that we've got down here, cut it, and paste it inside of this function that we just created. And that means that we are implicitly returning a list item for every message. Yeah. And I'm using Python as like examples because I don't know Angular, and we've all had the junior core. But yeah, I mean, I don't know Angular very well, so it could very well be just like that. Like, is it ng repeat? Is that what you guys use in that? Yeah, ng repeat is what you use for that. So if you save that and pop back over, what should you expect to see?
Well, I should expect to see an error on that same.
Yeah, so there's an error, but you also see two messages repeated twice. And it's because we haven't done anything with this value. We've literally just hard-coded a list item and returned it, and that's it. But let's look at this error. Yet again, this is React. This is not Firebase. each child in an array or iterator should have a unique key prop. All that means is that, remember when I told you the first day that React maintains a virtual DOM, and anything that changes in that virtual DOM, it then makes a diff between your current DOM and the virtual DOM and just changes the things that need to be changed. Well, if you iterate over and create a bunch of list items, React doesn't know which list item it needs to access. And so what we need to do here is on this list item, we say key is equal to I. It's the index of what it is that we are iterating over.
Then what will that actually look like in rendered HTML? Will it actually say key on the
On the HTML. It will.
And is the key just for us to look at right now, or is there a reason we're passing the key out? Like, is it for us to look at and keep track of order?
It's for React to look at it and keep track of. That's the main thing. So I honestly couldn't care less about the key, but React cares. That's why it threw this error. So if you type in key is equal to I, and yet again, the reason why we have these curly braces is because if you're going to access any kind of variable, anything like that, you need the curly braces. It's like in Mako when you have $ curly braces to access a Python variable. Same thing. So you save that, you go back here, and now you won't get that error in your console because React is happy. It has a key. It knows what to do.
Why don't I have keys like on the unordered list?
Anything that you haven't iterated over and created copies of, React generates a key for that itself. But since you're iterating over it and it's not seeing that in the code itself when it's rendering out the template, you need to give it an explicit key. Any questions? So let's go ahead and take this up and let's grab this stuff and actually access the message for these variables, okay? So here's the date. So we can substitute this for, what will we put in this in here? So curly brace message dot sent time, right? Okay, so instead of John, what are we going to put down here? Inside of curly braces, message dot sender. And instead of good morn to thee, message dot message. Cool, so if we save this, there's one thing that I know is going to look really weird, but we should see new stuff here. Now what looks weird here? That. We don't want that. We don't want just a timestamp. No one cares about that. And honestly, one of the worst things to do in JavaScript is have to deal with date time templating. And so for that reason, I saved you guys the hassle, and I had you install, when you ran npm install, a package called Moment. It's MomentJS. So at the top, if you type import moment from moment, that's importing the Moment library, which is a date time formatting library. And instead of message.sentTime, we can run arbitrary JavaScript inside of these curly braces. You're going to run moment and create a new moment class from that timestamp, or I guess a new moment object from that timestamp. And that object has a method attached to it called format. And format, you can pass in different formatting strings, and it will give you a date the way you want to. Now, in Slack, I also sent out a little message here saying you'll also need this. Copy that formatting string there and place that into format. So that's what it should look like. Moment, message.sentTime, .format, and that formatting string. Yeah?
After the and those are like spaces.
Yeah.
Is there, they're not going to
It looks nasty. Yeah.
Is there a better way just to
Yeah, so a way to do that would be to write some CSS that would have some right margin instead of that. And I just didn't want to deal with that at the time, so I just did the easy way out. But you could do that. So you save that, and on the right-hand side here, you should now have a nice formatted day for each of those. And your message box now has messages from Firebase. Cool? Do you have any issues over here?
Yeah, I just got off.
Okay.
I just had to practice a little bit.
So now we're only halfway there, but we are really, really close to finishing because all we need to do is push a new message. And this will automatically update for you, showing the new messages. So besides, I know he's tracking down a typo. Do we have any other issues? Anything else that I should reiterate or kind of go over? Yeah.
So my messages on the record is not only messages.
Okay.
But updates get forwarded.
Okay.
So that's something that want to now.
Yeah, so did you check your state through React DevTools? So if you go to React, so it does show the state?
Yeah.
So
It's meant to be like a console log for the return. You render it, it's not updating state.
And when you actually click on this component over here, your state does say that it has two messages there. And it will take a little bit because this is technically, your messages is empty on page load, and then it gets loaded in once Firebase returns back to you, which is an asynchronous function.
It's showing empty for the responsive state, so it's there.
Okay, and it's not showing any messages in your message box right here.
No.
So in your render function, are you sure that you're accessing this .state.messages.map?
Yeah.
And then message, 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 message. No messages in there.
That console log for return would be the state messages that comes out empty.
So it'll come out empty the first time.
It shouldn't do it all again.
It should re-render once you update your state in this update messages function.
That's not a rendering. I don't know.
Yeah, here, let me take a look at it real quick.
So check.
This is why. Because you're saving messages as an object. Yeah, that's right. Make sure that's a message.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, let's go ahead and, oh yeah. Oh yes, it is new date. So you're creating a new date object. And then get time is the function or the method on the date object that returns a timestamp. And so that'll just return right now, this current time right now. So something cool, if we had time, we could go in and we could just create by hand a new message object in here, and it would automatically show up without page refresh here. It's pretty fun. But because we're running low on time, I'd rather wire up this so you can start sending messages and seeing this update in real time rather than doing it by hand. Cool? So we're done with message box. We can close that. Let's go ahead and open up input card. So this is InputCard.js. Cool. Now, there are a couple of things in here that I've done for you, all right? Namely, if you click on input card in your React developer tools, you'll notice that new message is an empty string, but as soon as you start typing something, it updates to reflect the state. Your state is automatically updating. That doesn't happen, automatically. That happens because I wired this up for you guys beforehand, so I didn't want to spend time going through on how it's done because it's React and we're here to study Firebase. Cool? So, another thing you'll notice is if you hit enter or click this button, you do any of these here, you get a console log message that says send this message, and that is because, sorry, you guys saw my wife there. Not sorry that you saw her, she's beautiful. Is that you see a handle submit that I've wired up to that form. So anytime that form is submitted, this is where we're going to send the message. Make sense? So what do we need? What do we need first in here to be able to access Firebase? We do need to import Firebase, that's right. So import Firebase from Firebase. What else do we need? A connection. Did I hear you say that? Someone said that? Right there. Perfect. We need a connection, which is our ref. This .ref is equal to Firebase.database, database. I always laugh at that. And what node are we wanting to access? So we want to access the message node. It's a child node of our root node in Firebase. So that's our connection that we haven't turned on, but it's a connection waiting to be turned on, right? So we have everything that we need at this point to then be able to access this. Now, inside of handle submit, let's just do, because we are good developers and we're thinking about people using this the way that we wouldn't use this, we're going to go ahead and make a check in here in handle submit. First, we're going to check if this .state.new message, which is a JavaScript implicit check to make sure that new message is not just an empty string. We don't want to go ahead and create a bunch of blank messages out there for people that just hit enter on that accidentally. So we'll make sure there's actually a message in our string. Then we're going to construct a new message object locally, not in Firebase, locally. So const new message is equal to an object. And what attributes do we want on this object? Sender. Sender. How do we access sender? Close. It's props. It's props. So now the reason why we should know that is if you go to MainPage, your state is on MainPage. This is a React thing. Again, I'm prefacing all this that this is a React thing, not a Firebase thing. MainPage has your name on it, and we are passing that to your input card as a prop, as a property. And so it's not state because input card is not actually changing that at all. But it's a prop. It's something that should never change in input card. And so you should be able to see here this.props.name. What else do you need? Sent time, and we'll use that little recipe. New date.get time. You could. I just don't want to import it here. Message. And where do we get that from? New message. Because all we're doing in our state is just a string. So we have that new message, right? That should be an object there. Let's console.log this and see what it's looking like. There it is. Cool. Looks like everyone hitting Firebase all at the same time is causing it to be really slow. All right. Everyone getting that? Are they able to log out there? What about Firebase being slower? It's just the network in here. The network's being slammed. Yeah, Firebase itself, they can handle fast querying and things like that, but the internet in here I've found to be very slow. Yes, yeah. Yes, so your handle submit, all we've changed in here, we've added a ref, we've imported Firebase, and then we've changed our handle submit. So this is the main bulk of our code right here.
You want to be clear, like the message state.
Great observation. Yeah, definitely. So what we can do is we've already stored that new message attribute, right? So we want that cleared as fast as we can. We'll say, now, this is something in React. You never, ever, ever do this. Never. You will get bugs. It will not work. What you do instead, set state. Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you. Yep, that's right. Yep. That's the thing, is you don't want to say this.state.attribute equals or this.state equals. It's this.setState. Okay. We got 6 minutes. We can connect to it for there. The way that you push this now, we have to do two things. In Firebase, these are stored as objects. It's key value pair. Key value. Key value. So if we're pushing something brand new, we need a new key. And we don't want to have to like generate something random in JavaScript to then create a key. We'll let Firebase do that for us. So the way that you do that is you say this.ref, which refers to child message, .push, .key. And that returns back a brand new key in Firebase that you can then capture. So we'll say const new key is equal to that. And the way that we will then, there are several, if you Google Firebase write data, there are several methods for writing data in Firebase. You can update, there's a different one for updating as well, or you can set. And in my experience, set has been the one that has had the most consistent results. What that means is, so I'll show you what that means. So this.ref.child new key .set new message. Now let's deconstruct this, okay? Why did we need to say this.ref.child? Say that louder. That's right.
I think didn't you have to reference the message child of your base Firebase instance? Because it seems to me like it was just pushing to the base Firebase instead of message under the message.
Great question on that. Now, this.ref is pointing at message there. Yeah, that's a good question though. And you can chain this for as long as you want. If you've got a bunch in here, you could chain that till kingdom come. But that's stored on this.ref, right? So already we're on message, and just like you pointed out, if I were to say this.ref.set, that would clear all of these messages out of there and instead replace it with my new message. So let's, yeah. And that's the power of set, which is why a lot of people actually, some people choose not to use set because what set does is it says, clear out anything that's in there and reset it with whatever you're sending me. And that's powerful. That is like dropping everything on that node and resetting it. But I've had more consistent results with set than .update. So, plus we're creating something brand new. So if we say that that's what we want right there, okay, and we take our Firebase console and we have it just right alongside our messaging service, someone's already writing messages. Have I used it before? I haven't. No. It's good to know, though. I'll have to check that out. So it looks like Tyler is connected to my database through the class 1 thing. And you'll notice, if anyone else is, you'll notice a new key popped up over here on the right-hand side in Firebase. So Tyler, send another message. Please make it appropriate. Boom, another message popped up right here, and we got something right here. All right, if I start typing something, we get something new there. And we now have a functioning chat room. Obviously, there's a lot to go on. We need pagination, we need authentication and security and things like that. But you now have, in 2 class periods, you now have a chat room. You just made wiring up Firebase and React. Is anyone not getting that dot set? And actually, here, so just to reiterate this, I'm going to take this dot child off. Refresh this. We're getting all that. Maybe I feel like Wagstaff isn't king, and so I'm going to clear all of those messages out. And now it's broken because instead of actually having a messages icon in there, it's just a bunch of stuff in there, and you've just destroyed your Firebase. Right? Yeah, that's right. You got, but notice it's not nested inside of an object, and so our rendering doesn't know what to do with those single attributes. And so in here, I'm just going to go out and I'll delete these one by one, and get rid of all that stuff that we don't want. And I'll change this back to .child, new key, save that. And we're good. Any questions on that? We covered a lot. We did a good job in these past 2 classes. So now, given the fact that it's the end of class, and we've got one more class on this, the Firebase Authentication system you have to think of it as 2 separate databases they maintain for you. You have a database of users, and then your Firebase database. And that one can get really complicated, and it involves, to get an adequate example of it, it involves a lot of coding on the front end to get a login screen working and get all of that working. We're not going to have enough time for that. What we will have enough time for come next class are Firebase security rules, and so that's what we'll go over next class, is Firebase security rules. But I highly encourage you to go out and look up Firebase Authentication, because like I mentioned in the very beginning, Firebase now is no longer just a database as a service. It's a full-blown backend as a service, including authentication, analytics, all of that. And the fact that you can go out and create an account for free right now and be able to use it on a production grade environment, small production grade environment for a couple months for free, I mean, that's something worth looking into.
A couple months, free until you get past a certain volume.
Yeah, so my assumption is that after a certain couple of months, your volume will get past it. But if you're never going to pass that volume, then it will be free forever. So it's not like AWS where you've only got 12 months. You pass a certain threshold of queries and listeners per day or per month or something. So
I don't really use React at all, per se. So is this same, I'm just looking at the syntax for connecting Firebase, referencing each other. Is that pretty much the same for if I'm just doing something like that?
yeah. Hey guys, real quick, this was a great question, and I want to kind of go over this. So he asked, he doesn't really use React much. This same syntax, can you use it anywhere? That's the main reason why I didn't use the React Fire library. The library that we just used is the straight Firebase JavaScript SDK. So if you take all of this stuff and import the right library into your Angular project, that is word for word the exact syntax that you will use in an Angular project, or in Backbone, or in Ember, or any other JavaScript framework you use. That is the exact syntax that you will use. Now, there are libraries for Angular. Angular Fire makes it much easier, and unlike React Fire, Angular Fire I think is really manageable with React or with Angular 2. React Fire is it's honestly doesn't really work with ES6 classes, so that's why another reason why I don't use it. Yeah.
Just on that note, though, if you are using the ES6 syntax, you might know if you just have that in a JS file and include that. And if you're using you just need to add some table potentially to convert it to normal JavaScript syntax if you want it to be a fully browser support.
Yeah, and what he's talking about is in this, when you look at this real quick, this Firebase in message box, this syntax right here, well, I guess, yeah, so the sort, yes, but I'm strictly speaking Firebase, this.ref.on, this.ref.off. What you need to have in here is you deal with var function update messages, something like that. It wouldn't be like this.update messages because that's an ES6 class. But for the most part, all of the other Firebase stuff that you've done, that should translate over no problem. Like this part right here, child.set, all of that, that's all the same stuff. So, good point though. There are some, it's a little bit of ES6 mingled in there.
All right, thank you very much.
So I'm going to go ahead and add this all to the class 2 branch. Feel free to go out and keep hacking away, and when we get back to class on Monday, we can go ahead and just pull from class 2.
So Firebase Monday, data visualization competition Wednesday.
It's really good for the most part. Really, really good until you get into the nitty-gritty. Like the whole issue that I ran into that I spent, I guess it actually wasn't 15 hours, it was probably like 8. But that issue that I ran into, Stack Overflow, like the Firebase, like all those docs, I had to pour over those and then figure out how that applied to my thing specifically. So, for the most part though, they have really good documentation.